Charleston, South Carolina, 1905. The air smells like salt and sweat. Black folks work the docks and pick the fields. The law is whatever a white man says it is. October 31st. A boy is born into this world, the son of a laborer and a woman who cleans houses for pennies. His name is Ellsworth Raymond Johnson. His childhood is unremarkable, save for one detail: a large, misshapen bump on the back of his skull. The other children mock him, call him Bumpy. The name sticks like tar. He grows up fast, too fast. By the time he's a teenager, the South has shown him what it does to black boys who step out of line. He sees men lynched for looking at a white woman the wrong way. He watches his father break his back for nothing. And he learns a lesson that will define the rest of his life. Power isn't given, it's taken. At 15, Bumpy gets into a fight with a white man. The details don't matter. What matters is that in the South, there are only two outcomes for a black boy who raises his fist to a white man: a noose or a train ticket north. Bumpy chooses the train. When Bumpy Johnson steps off the train at Grand Central Station in 1919, he's just another Southern kid chasing a dream. Harlem is in the midst of the Renaissance, a cultural explosion of art, music, and black excellence. Langston Hughes is writing poetry. Duke Ellington is playing piano. The Cotton Club is the hottest spot in New York. But Bumpy doesn't see the glamour, he sees the reality. Harlem is a ghetto, overcrowded, underfunded, redlined into oblivion. Black families are crammed into tenements where landlords charge double what they charge white tenants downtown. The police are corrupt. The politicians are bought. And if you want to survive, you hustle. Bumpy tries the straight life. He works odd jobs: dishwasher, janitor, delivery boy. But the pay is an insult, and the city chews up boys like him and spits them out. So he turns to the streets. At first it's small time, running numbers, stealing, muscle work for the local gangsters who run the policy rackets. But Bumpy isn't like the other street kids. He's smart, disciplined, and he has something most of them don't: a code. He doesn't rob from his own people. He doesn't touch women or children, and he doesn't forgive betrayal. The older gangsters notice. In the early 1930s, Bumpy meets the woman who will change his life: Stephanie St. Clair. She's a legend in her own right, a black woman from the French Caribbean who runs Harlem's numbers racket with an iron fist. They call her Madame Queen. She's elegant, ruthless, and feared by men twice her size. She wears diamonds and carries a pistol in her purse. She refuses to bow to the white mob bosses trying to muscle in on her territory. And she sees something in Bumpy. He's rough around the edges, sure, but he's loyal, he's strategic, and most importantly, he's hungry. Stephanie takes him under her wing. She teaches him the art of the racket: how to run numbers, how to manage enforcers, how to read people. She teaches him that in their world, respect is currency, fear is leverage, and violence is a tool, not a hobby. Bumpy absorbs it all like a sponge. But the lesson that sticks with him most: never let them make you small, Bumpy. You own your kingdom or you die in someone else's. He becomes her top enforcer, her muscle, her most trusted lieutenant. And when the Italian mobsters come sniffing around Harlem, trying to take what Stephanie built, Bumpy is the one who meets them at the door. With a gun. The year is 1931. Dutch Schultz, a vicious, paranoid, and ruthless Jewish mobster from the Bronx, decides he wants Harlem. The numbers game is too profitable to ignore. Millions of dollars flow through those streets every week, and Schultz wants his cut. He doesn't ask politely. He sends his men in armed, brutal, and without mercy. They beat shop owners. They torch storefronts. They execute anyone who refuses to pay tribute. And they make one thing very clear: Harlem belongs to Dutch Schultz now. Stephanie St. Clair fights back. She rallies the Harlem gangsters. She writes letters to the police, to the newspapers, even to the mayor, exposing the corruption, nomming names, calling out the mob's stranglehold on the neighborhood. But the police don't care. The politicians are bought, and the Italian Mafia, led by Lucky Luciano and Mayor Lansky, are happy to let Schultz do the dirty work as long as they get a piece. It's a war, and wars have casualties. Bumpy watches it all unfold. He sees the fear in people's eyes, the blood in the streets, the way Dutch Schultz's men swagger through Harlem like they own the place. And something inside him snaps. He makes a decision, not for Stephanie, not for the money, for Harlem. One night, Bumpy stands in the back of a smoky speakeasy on 145th Street. Across from him sits one of Dutch Schultz's top enforcers, a man who just burned down a barbershop because the owner wouldn't pay protection money. The enforcer is laughing, drinking, bragging. Bumpy waits until the man's guard is down. Then he walks over, slow and deliberate. He leans in close, and in a voice cold enough to freeze blood, he says, "Tell Dutch Schultz that Harlem doesn't bow, not to him, not to anyone." The enforcer laughs, reaches for his gun. He never gets the chance. The gunshot echoes through the speakeasy like thunder. And just like that, Bumpy Johnson declares war on the most dangerous man in New York. The enforcer's body is found 3 blocks away, dumped in an alley off Lenox Avenue. 2 bullets, clean shots, professional. Word spreads through Harlem like wildfire. Bumpy Johnson just killed one of Dutch Schultz's men. In the tenements, people whisper his name with a mixture of fear and hope. In the speakeasies, gangsters place bets on how long he'll survive. And in the Bronx, Dutch Schultz, sitting in his fortified headquarters surrounded by armed guards, hears the news and smiles. Not because he's amused. Because now he has an excuse to burn Harlem to the ground. Schultz sends a message back, delivered by a terrified runner who can barely keep his hands from shaking. "Tell that boy he's a dead man walking." Bumpy's response is simple. He doesn't send a message. He sends 3 more bodies. The war is on. But Bumpy Johnson isn't stupid. He knows he can't beat Dutch Schultz in a straight fight. Schultz has more men, more guns, more money, and the backing of the Italian Mafia. Lucky Luciano and Mayor Lansky have already carved up New York like a Thanksgiving turkey, and they're not about to let some Harlem upstart disrupt their cash flow. So Bumpy doesn't fight like a gangster, he fights like a general. While Schultz's men storm through Harlem with baseball bats and Tommy guns, Bumpy does something smarter. He wins the people. He walks into barbershops, into churches, into tenement hallways. He sits with the old women who have lived in Harlem since before the Renaissance. He listens to the shop owners who have been shaken down, the families who have been terrorized, the kids who have watched their fathers beaten bloody in the street. And he makes them a promise. Dutch Schultz doesn't own you. He doesn't protect you. He bleeds you dry and leaves you with nothing. But if you stand with me, if you trust me, I'll make sure Harlem stays ours. It's a gamble, a huge one, but slowly, painfully it works. The people of Harlem start to resist. When Schultz's men come collecting, they find doors locked and windows shuttered. When they try to muscle in on a numbers spot, the runners vanish into the maze of tenement rooftops. When they threaten violence, they find themselves surrounded by silent, hostile crowds. And when they're caught alone, Bumpy's men are waiting. Make no mistake, this isn't a clean war. Bumpy Johnson is many things, but he's not a saint. Bodies pile up on both sides. Schultz's men die in alleyways and basements in the trunks of stolen cars. But Harlem bleeds too. Innocent people get caught in the crossfire. A numbers runner is tortured for information. A shop owner who refuses to pay Schultz is beaten so badly he never walks again. A young woman, just 17, is killed when a stray bullet crashes through her apartment window. Bumpy attends her funeral. He stands in the back of the church, hat in hand, watching her mother collapse in grief. And for a moment, just a moment, something flickers across his face. Regret, guilt. But then it's gone. Because in Bumpy's world, guilt is a luxury. Survival is the only currency that matters. After the funeral, he pulls two of his most trusted men aside, Junie Bayard and Nat Pettigrew, and gives them an order that will become legendary in Harlem. From now on, we don't just fight back. We hunt. Dutch Schultz isn't used to being on the defensive. For months, he's been the aggressor, the unstoppable force carving up Harlem for profit. But now, something's changed. His men are disappearing. His collections are coming up short. And every time he sends reinforcements into Harlem, they come back bloody and broken. Or they don't come back at all. Schultz is furious, paranoid. He starts seeing enemies everywhere. He executes his own men for incompetence. He screams at Lucky Luciano and Mayor Lansky, demanding they give him more muscle, more guns, more respect. But the Italians are starting to wonder if Dutch Schultz is more trouble than he's worth. Meanwhile, Bumpy is learning. He studies the way the Italians operate, the way they control politicians with bribes and blackmail, the way they launder money through legitimate businesses, the way they use fear and respect in equal measure to build empires that last. He's not just fighting a war, he's learning how to run one, and he's getting good at it. But not everyone is impressed. Stephanie St. Clair watches Bumpy's rise with a mixture of pride and concern. She knows he's smart. She knows he's ruthless. But she also knows something else. He's drawing too much attention. One night she summons him to her apartment, a lavish space filled with fine furniture, expensive art, and the smell of French perfume. She pours him a drink and sits across from him, her dark eyes sharp as knives. "You're making a name for yourself, Bumpy," she says, "and that's dangerous." Bumpy sips his drink unbothered. "Dutch Schultz knows my name, good, let him be scared." Stephanie shakes her head. "It's not Schultz I'm worried about, it's the Italians." She leans forward and her voice drops to a whisper. "Lucky Luciano doesn't care about you right now because you're killing Schultz's men, not his. But the moment you become a threat to the commission, the moment they think you want more than just Harlem, they'll erase you. And there's nothing I can do to stop them." Bumpy meets her gaze, steady, unflinching. "Then I'll make sure they never see me as a threat," he says. "I'll make sure they see me as an asset." Stephanie studies him for a long moment. Then she smiles, a sad, knowing smile. "You're either going to be the greatest this city's ever seen," she says, "or you're going to be dead before you're 30. Bumpy stands, adjusts his hat, and heads for the door. "I'll take those odds," he says. October 1935. Dutch Schultz is sitting in the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey. He's there for a meeting, business as usual. But what he doesn't know is that Lucky Luciano and the commission have made a decision. Dutch Schultz is too reckless, too violent, too unstable. He's planning to assassinate Thomas Dewey, the crusading prosecutor who's been investigating organized crime. And the commission knows that if Schultz kills a federal prosecutor, the heat will come down on all of them. So they vote, and Dutch Schultz is sentenced to death. At 10:15 in the evening, two hitmen walk into the Palace Chop House. They don't say a word, they just open fire. Dutch Schultz dies the next day, delirious and rambling, his empire shattered. And in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson hears the news and knows exactly what it means. The throne is empty. But claiming the throne isn't simple. With Schultz dead, the Italian Mafia, led by Lucky Luciano, moves in to take control of Harlem's rackets. They've got the money, the muscle, and the political connections. They could crush Bumpy like an insect if they wanted to. But they don't, because Lucky Luciano is smart. He knows that Harlem isn't like Little Italy or the Lower East Side. It's a powder keg, and trying to rule it with brute force will only lead to more bloodshed, more attention, more problems. So he makes Bumpy an offer. They meet in a dimly lit social club in Lower Manhattan. Luciano sits at the head of the table, flanked by Mayor Lansky and Frank Costello. Bumpy sits alone. Luciano gets straight to the point. "You've got a choice, Bumpy. You can keep fighting us and we'll bury you, or you can work with us and we'll make you rich. Bumpy doesn't flinch. What's the catch? Luciano smiles. You run Harlem for us, you keep the numbers flowing, you keep the peace. And in return, you get a cut, a big cut. You become the boss of Harlem under our protection. It's not a partnership, it's a leash, but it's also an opportunity. Bumpy looks Luciano in the eye and says one word, deal. As Bumpy walks out of the social club into the cold New York night, he knows exactly what he's done. He's made a deal with the devil. But he's also just become the most powerful black man in Harlem. And as he lights a cigarette and watches the city lights flicker in the distance, one thought burns in his mind. This is just the beginning. Part 313, 1936. Bumpy Johnson is 30 years old and Harlem is his. Not on paper, not officially, but on the streets where it matters, everyone knows who runs the show. He controls the numbers rackets that pump millions of dollars through the neighborhood every year. He oversees the gambling dens, the policy banks, the underground lotteries that give working-class families a sliver of hope in the darkness of the Depression. He collects tribute from every hustler, pimp, and bootlegger operating north of 110th Street. And he does it with a style that's uniquely his own. Unlike the flashy mobsters downtown, the ones who wear silk suits and drive Cadillacs and throw money around like confetti, Bumpy moves quietly. He dresses well, but not ostentatiously. He walks the streets of Harlem like a man who belongs there, because he does. He eats in the same diners as the working folks. He sits in the same barbershops. He knows the names of the old women on the stoops and the kids playing stickball in the streets. To the people of Harlem, he's not just a gangster, he's their gangster. When a landlord tries to evict a family for being a week late on rent, Bumpy shows up at the landlord's office. The eviction notice disappears. When the police shake down a local merchant for bribes, Bumpy has a quiet word with the precinct captain. The shakedowns stop. When a numbers runner gets arrested, Bumpy's lawyers are there within the hour. He builds a reputation. Bumpy Johnson takes care of his own. But power always comes with a price, and in Harlem, that price is paid in blood. The alliance with Lucky Luciano works for a while. Bumpy runs Harlem. The Italians get their cut. Everyone makes money. Everyone stays in their lane. But the truth is, the Italians never really see Bumpy as an equal. To Lucky Luciano, Mayor Lansky, and Frank Costello, Bumpy is an asset, a useful tool for managing a neighborhood they don't fully understand. He's allowed to operate because it's convenient, because it's profitable, because it keeps the peace. But the moment he steps out of line, the moment he forgets his place, they'll remind him who really runs New York. And Bumpy knows it. It gnaws at him. Late at night, alone in his apartment, he thinks about it. He's built an empire, but it's an empire on borrowed ground. He's the king of Harlem, but only because the Italians allow it. And Bumpy Johnson doesn't like asking permission. The tension simmers for years. Small slights, disrespectful comments, meetings where he's kept waiting, deals where the Italians change the terms without asking. But Bumpy bides his time. He's learned patience, strategy, the long game. He knows that if he moves too soon, if he challenges the Italians before he's ready, they'll crush him without a second thought. So he waits and he plans. But not everyone is willing to wait. In the late 1930s, a new player enters the game, the Genovese family. Vito Genovese is a ruthless, ambitious mobster who's been watching Harlem's profits with hungry eyes. He sees the millions flowing through the numbers rackets, and he wants a bigger piece. He doesn't care about Luciano's arrangement with Bumpy. He doesn't care about keeping the peace. He just wants the money. Genovese starts muscling in on Bumpy's operations. His men show up at policy banks and demand higher tributes. They threaten runners. They beat collectors. They make it clear that the old deal is over. Harlem belongs to the Genovese family now. Bumpy's response is swift and brutal. When Genovese's men try to take over a policy bank on 135th Street, they find the doors locked and the streets empty. When they break in, Bumpy's crew is waiting. 3 of Genovese's men are hospitalized. The message is clear: touch my operations and you bleed. But Genovese doesn't back down. He sends more men, bigger crews, more guns. And suddenly, Harlem is a war zone again. The fighting is vicious. Bodies drop on both sides. A Genovese enforcer is found floating in the Harlem River, his throat slit. 2 of Bumpy's numbers runners are gunned down outside a jazz club. A policy bank is firebombed, killing everyone inside. The people of Harlem are caught in the middle. Families lock their doors and keep their children inside. Shop owners shutter their windows. The streets that were once alive with music and laughter are now filled with sirens and gunfire. And Bumpy feels the weight of it. He's not a man who loses sleep easily, but during this war he does. He sees the fear in people's eyes. He hears the mothers crying for their sons. He knows that every bullet fired in Harlem streets is a bullet fired in his war. But he can't afford to show weakness. One night he gathers his top lieutenants in the back room of a funeral parlor. Junie Bayard, Nat Pettigrew, and a dozen others, men who have bled for him, killed for him, and would die for him. Bumpy looks them in the eye and says, "Genovese thinks he can take what we built. He thinks we'll roll over. He's wrong. We fight until he backs off or until one of us is dead. No surrender, no retreat. We hold the line." His men nod, and the war continues. But Bumpy knows he can't win a war of attrition. Genovese has the resources of the entire Italian Mafia behind him. He can replace every man Bumpy kills. He can outlast him, outspend him, and eventually crush him. So Bumpy does what he does best. He outthinks him. He reaches out to someone he hasn't spoken to in years, Frank Costello. Costello is one of the most powerful men in the Italian Mafia, a political fixer, a diplomat, a man who prefers bribes and handshakes to bullets and bloodshed. He's also a rival of Vito Genovese. Bumpy arranges a meeting. They sit in a quiet restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, far from the chaos of Harlem. Costello, impeccably dressed and smoking a cigar, listens as Bumpy lays out his case. "Genovese is making a mess," Bumpy says. "He's drawing heat. The cops are sniffing around Harlem because of all the bodies, and when the cops start sniffing, everyone suffers. You, me, the whole commission." Costello nods slowly. "So what do you want?" Bumpy leans forward. "I want you to rein him in, tell him to back off, tell him Harlem stays mine, and in return I'll make sure the money keeps flowing. Quiet, clean, no more wars, no more heat." Costello studies him. This isn't just a gangster asking for help. This is a businessman making a deal. After a long silence, Costello smiles. "You've got balls, Bumpy, I'll give you that." He extends his hand. "You've got a deal." Within weeks, Vito Genovese's men pull back from Harlem. It's not a public announcement. There's no fanfare, but the attacks stop. The muscle disappears. The tributes are no longer demanded. Bumpy has won. But the victory comes with scars. Dozens of men are dead. Families are destroyed. Businesses are burned. And Bumpy knows that he's now indebted to Frank Costello, a debt that will eventually come due. Still, Harlem is his again. And this time, he's not taking any chances. He reorganizes his operations. He recruits new enforcers. He builds alliances with other black gangsters in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and New Jersey. He diversifies his income: extortion, loan sharking, narcotics. He becomes untouchable. Or so he thinks. 1951. Bumpy Johnson is 45 years old and he's at the height of his power. He survived wars with the mob. He survived the police. He survived betrayals and assassination attempts. but he can't survive the law forever. The federal government has been building a case against him for years: racketeering, extortion, narcotics trafficking, and in December 1951 they finally have enough. U.S. Marshals raid his apartment in the early morning hours. Bumpy doesn't resist. He knows the game. He's been arrested before. But this time is different. This time they have evidence: witnesses, ledgers, recorded conversations. Bumpy Johnson is sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. As the judge reads the sentence, Bumpy's face is a mask. No emotion, no fear, just cold calculation. Because even as they take him away in handcuffs, even as the prison doors slam shut behind him, Bumpy knows one thing: this isn't the end. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, 1954. Bumpy Johnson sits in his cell staring at the cold stone walls. Around him, the most dangerous criminals in America: murderers, mobsters, men who would kill for a cigarette. But Bumpy isn't afraid, because even in prison he's planning, calculating, waiting. And when the cell door opens one morning and a guard tells him he has a visitor, Bumpy knows exactly who it is. A man in prison clothes, tall, thin, eyes like fire. Malcolm Little, soon to be known as Malcolm X. And everything is about to change. Part 413, 37. Alcatraz is hell on earth. Perched on a rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay, it's designed to break men. The isolation, the cold, the endless monotony of concrete and steel. Prisoners go mad in Alcatraz. They kill themselves. They kill each other. But Bumpy Johnson doesn't break. He adapts. Within weeks of arriving, he's established himself. Not through violence, though he's more than capable, but through intelligence. He reads voraciously: philosophy, history, politics. He studies the law, looking for loopholes, technicalities, anything that might shorten his sentence. And he watches. He observes the power structures inside the prison: who runs what, who owes who can be bought and who can be broken. And slowly, methodically, he carves out his own space. Even in Alcatraz, Bumpy Johnson is a force. But it's lonely. The years drag on. 1952, 1953, 1954. Letters from Harlem arrive sporadically. His wife Mame writes to him every week, letters filled with news from home, encouragement, love. But there are other letters too, letters that tell him his empire is crumbling. With Bumpy gone, the vultures are circling. Italian mobsters are taking over his policy banks. Corrupt cops are shaking down his operators. Young gangsters are carving up his territory, fighting among themselves, destroying everything he built. And there's nothing Bumpy can do about it, not from inside these walls. The visitor's room at Alcatraz is a sterile, oppressive space. Guards watch every movement. Conversations are monitored. But when Malcolm Little, soon to be known as Malcolm X, walks into that room, the air changes. He's not what Bumpy expected: tall, thin, eyes like fire. Malcolm is serving time for burglary, but he's been transformed. He's found the Nation of Islam. He's found purpose, and he's looking for allies. They sit across from each other, two men from completely different worlds, yet somehow the same. "I've heard about you," Malcolm says. His voice is sharp, precise. "They say you ran Harlem." Bumpy nods. "I did. And now I'm here." Malcolm leans forward. "The white man put you here, just like he put me here, just like he puts all of us in cages, one way or another." Bumpy listens. He's heard revolutionary talk before. Angry young men who want to burn the system down, but Malcolm is different. There's clarity in his words, strategy, vision. "You built power," Malcolm continues, "but you built it in their system. You worked with their mobsters, you paid their cops, you played by their rules, and where did it get you?" Bumpy's jaw tightens. "It got me respect, it got me money, it got me control over my own neighborhood." "Did it?" Malcolm's eyes bore into him. "Or did it just make you a useful criminal, a black man they could control. The words sting because there's truth in them. Bumpy has always known he was on a leash, that the Italians allowed him to operate because it suited them, that the moment he became inconvenient, they could pull him down. But he's never said it out loud. Malcolm softened slightly. I'm not judging you, brother. I did the same thing. I hustled. I stole. I degraded myself for scraps from the white man's table. But there's another way. A way to build power that they can't take from you. And what's that? Bumpy asks. Unity, organization, discipline. We stop fighting each other and start building for ourselves. Real businesses, real institutions, a real future for our people. Bumpy is quiet for a long time. Then he says, "That's a beautiful dream, Malcolm, but dreams don't survive in Harlem. Only power does." Malcolm smiles, a sad, knowing smile. "Then maybe," he says, "it's time we change what power looks like." That conversation haunts Bumpy. For months afterward, he thinks about Malcolm's words, about unity, about building something that lasts, about being more than just a gangster. He starts to see his life differently. All those years fighting for Harlem, was it really for the people, or was it for himself, for the money, the respect, the throne? He doesn't have answers, but for the first time in his life, Bumpy Johnson starts asking questions. He reads more, not just law books and history, but philosophy, Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, Langston Hughes. He devours everything he can find about black resistance, black empowerment, black identity. And slowly, something shifts inside him. He's still a gangster, still ruthless, still willing to do whatever it takes to survive. But now there's something else, a purpose beyond profit. 1963. After serving 12 years, Bumpy Johnson is released from prison. He's 57 years old. The world has changed. Harlem has changed. He steps off the bus on 125th Street and it's like landing on a different planet. The Harlem Renaissance is long over. The neighborhood is poorer, angrier, more desperate. Drugs, heroin specifically, are flooding the streets, destroying families, turning young men into walking corpses. The Italian mob has tightened its grip, and the black community is fracturing under the weight of poverty, police brutality, and systemic neglect. But Bumpy also sees something else, a movement. The civil rights movement is in full swing. Martin Luther King Jr. is preaching nonviolence. Malcolm X, now out of prison and a national figure, is preaching self-defense and black nationalism. The Nation of Islam is growing. Young people are organizing, protesting, fighting back. Harlem is alive again, just in a different way. Bumpy walks through the streets and people recognize him. Older folks who remember his reign. Young hustlers who have heard the legends. They greet him with respect, some with fear, some with hope. He goes home to Mame. She's waited for him, 12 years. She's older now, grayer, but her eyes are the same. She throws her arms around him and weeps. "Welcome home, Bumpy," she whispers. He holds her tight. "I'm back," he says, "and I'm not going anywhere." But coming home and taking back what's his are two different things. In Bumpy's absence, Harlem's underworld has splintered. The Italians, specifically the Genovese family, control most of the heroin trade. A young, ambitious black gangster named Nicky Barnes is rising fast, moving weight and making millions. And there are dozens of smaller operators, all fighting for scraps. Nobody's waiting to hand Bumpy his crown back. He has to take it. He starts small. He reaches out to old allies, the ones who survived, the ones who stayed loyal. Junie Byatt is still around, older and slower but still deadly. Nat Pettigrew is dead, killed in a shootout years ago. But there are others, younger men who grew up hearing stories about Bumpy Johnson. He rebuilds his network. But this time he's smarter, more careful. He doesn't go to war with the Italians. He knows that game ends badly. Instead, he carves out his own space. He takes control of the policy rackets again, The numbers games that the Italians don't care about because heroin is more profitable. He also does something unexpected. He starts giving back. He funds community programs. He pays for funerals when families can't afford them. He makes sure the old folks in his neighborhood have food and heat in the winter. He employs young men, not just as muscle, but as runners, clerks, legitimate workers. People notice, and slowly his reputation shifts. He's still feared, still respected as a gangster, but now he's also seen as something else, a protector. But there's one problem Bumpy can't ignore: heroin. It's everywhere, flooding Harlem like a plague. Young men, boys really, are overdosing in alleys. Mothers are burying their sons. Entire families are being destroyed. And the Italians are getting rich off it. Bumpy hates it. He's always had a code. He's sold numbers. He's run gambling. He's done extortion and violence. But drugs that destroy his own people, that's different. He makes a decision. He won't deal heroin, and he won't let anyone in his organization deal it either. It's a moral line, and it costs him. Younger gangsters, the ones chasing fast money, think he's weak, out of touch, a relic from a different era. Some of them start working with the Italians directly, cutting Bumpy out. But Bumpy doesn't budge. One night, a young dealer named Anton approaches him. He wants to use Bumpy's policy banks to launder drug money. Big money. Bumpy looks him dead in the eye and says, "I won't poison my own people. You want to sell that poison, you do it somewhere else, but not in my Harlem." Anton laughs. "Your Harlem? Old man, this ain't your Harlem anymore." Bumpy doesn't say another word. 3 days later, Anton is found beaten half to death in an alley. The message is clear. Some lines don't get crossed. During this time, Bumpy reconnects with Malcolm X. Malcolm is now a prominent figure in the Nation of Islam, a fiery orator who's captivating Black America with his message of self-reliance and resistance. He's controversial, dangerous to the establishment, and the FBI is watching his every move. But Malcolm remembers Bumpy, remembers their conversations in Alcatraz, and he sees an opportunity. They meet in a small restaurant in Harlem. Malcolm is cautious. He knows Bumpy's reputation, but he also knows Bumpy has power, real power. "I need your help," Malcolm says. Bumpy raises an eyebrow. "With what?" "Protection. The nation has enemies. The government, white supremacists, even people within our own community who want me dead. I need men I can trust, men who won't break." Bumpy considers this, and what do I get? Malcolm smiles. Respect, legitimacy, a chance to be more than just a gangster. It's a strange partnership, the revolutionary and the criminal, but it works. Bumpy's men provide security at Nation of Islam events. They watch Malcolm's back. They make sure no one gets close enough to harm him. And in return, Malcolm gives Bumpy something he's never had before, a connection to something bigger than himself. February 21, 1965, the Audubon Ballroom. Bumpy Johnson stands in the back of the crowded room, watching as Malcolm X takes the stage. The place is packed, hundreds of people, all waiting to hear Malcolm speak. Bumpy's men are positioned throughout the hall, eyes sharp, hands ready. Malcolm begins his speech, and then chaos. A commotion in the crowd, shouting, movement. Bumpy sees it happening in slow motion, 3 men rushing the stage, guns drawn. He moves fast, pushing through the crowd, but he's too far away. The shots ring out, once, twice, a dozen times. Malcolm falls. And in that moment, in the screaming, the panic, the blood spreading across the stage, Bumpy Johnson realizes something. No one is untouchable. Part 513, 49. Malcolm X is dead. The ambulance arrives too late. The doctors can't save him. 21 gunshot wounds. He dies on the operating table while Bumpy Johnson stands in the hospital corridor, fists clenched, jaw tight. He doesn't cry. Men like Bumpy don't cry. But inside, something breaks. Malcolm wasn't just an ally. He was a mirror, showing Bumpy a version of himself that could have been. A man who fought for his people, not just for power. A man who stood for something greater. And now he's gone, murdered by his own, by men who claim to be brothers. Bumpy walks out of the hospital into the cold February night. The streets of Harlem are buzzing with shock, anger, grief. People gather on corners, in barbershops, in churches. Some weep, some rage, some simply stand in stunned silence. Malcolm X, the voice of a generation, is dead at 39. And Bumpy Johnson, 60 years old, realizes something he's known his whole life but never fully accepted. Violence always comes home. The mid-1960s are a turning point. Harlem is changing faster than Bumpy can keep up. The civil rights movement is reaching its peak, marches, sit-ins, legislation. Dr. King is preaching love and nonviolence. Young activists are organizing. The Black Panther Party is rising, armed and militant. But Harlem itself is dying. Poverty is worse than ever. Buildings are crumbling. Businesses are closing. White flight has gutted the tax base and the city government doesn't care. Police brutality is rampant. And heroin god, the heroine, is destroying entire generations. Bumpy watches it all with a growing sense of helplessness. He still has power. He still runs the numbers. He still commands respect. But the world is moving past him. The young gangsters coming up don't care about his code. They don't care about protecting the neighborhood. They're hungry, ruthless, and willing to sell poison to their own mothers if the price is right. Men like Frank Lucas and Nicky Barnes, young, ambitious, connected, are building empires on heroin. They're making millions. Flying to Southeast Asia to buy pure heroin from the source, cutting out the Italian middlemen, flooding Harlem with cheap, deadly product. And they're getting rich. Bumpy confronts them, tries to reason with them. "You're killing our people," he tells Frank Lucas one night. "You're destroying everything we built." Lucas, cocky, confident, dressed in an expensive suit, just smiles. "Old man, the world changed while you were locked up. This ain't the 1940s no more. You had your time. This is my time now." But Bumpy wants to put a bullet in his skull, but he doesn't. Because deep down he knows Lucas is right. The world has changed. And Bumpy Johnson is a relic. But Bumpy isn't done yet. He may be older, slower, out of step with the times, but he still has one thing the young gangsters don't: experience. In 1967, a turf war erupts between rival drug dealers in Harlem. Bodies are dropping. Innocent people are getting caught in the crossfire. The neighborhood is a war zone. The Italian mob, specifically the Genovese family, sees an opportunity. They plan to move in, take control, and squeeze every dollar out of Harlem until there's nothing left. But Bumpy won't let that happen. He calls a meeting, not with the Italians, with the young black gangsters tearing Harlem apart. They meet in a dimly lit social club on 132nd Street. Frank Lucas is there, Nicky Barnes, a dozen others, young men with guns and attitudes, all wondering why they should listen to some old-timer. Bumpy stands at the head of the table, no weapon, no backup, just him. "You think you're smart," he says, his voice low and steady. "You think you're building empires, but all you're doing is making it easy for the Italians to take everything." The room is silent. You're fighting each other while they're getting ready to swallow you whole. And when they do, they won't let you keep a dime. They'll use you up and throw you away, just like they did to everyone before you. Frank Lucas leans back in his chair. "So what are you saying, old man?" Bumpy's eyes flash. "I'm saying you got two choices. You keep fighting each other and lose everything. Or you work together, keep the Italians out, and actually build something that lasts." It's a gamble, a huge one. These men don't trust each other. They certainly don't trust Bumpy. But slowly, grudgingly, they listen. because even they know Bumpy Johnson doesn't bluff. A fragile truce is formed. The young gangsters agree to stop the open warfare. They carve up Harlem into territories, not perfectly, not permanently, but enough to stop the bloodshed. And with a unified front, they're able to push back against the Italian mob's encroachment. It's not peace, it's barely even a ceasefire, but it's enough. Bumpy has bought Harlem a little more time. But the cost weighs on him. He's brokered a truce between drug dealers, men who are poisoning his community. He's kept the Italians at bay, but only by empowering a new generation of criminals who care nothing for the people. He wonders if he's made things better or worse. Late at night, alone with Mame, he confesses his doubts. I spent my whole life trying to control this neighborhood, he says, trying to protect it, but maybe I just made it easier for the next generation to destroy it. Mame takes his hand. She's been with him through everything. Prison, wars, betrayals. She's the only person who truly knows him. You did what you could, Bumpy, she says gently. You can't save everyone, you can't fix everything, but you tried, and people remember that. He wants to believe her, but he's not sure he does. 1968. Bumpy Johnson is 62 years old and he's tired. Not physically, though his body is showing the wear of 6 decades of violence and stress, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. He's seen too much, lost too much. Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated in April. The cities erupt in riots. Harlem burns, again. Robert Kennedy is assassinated in June. The Vietnam War rages on, sending young black men to die in a jungle halfway around the world. And Harlem, his Harlem, is drowning in drugs, poverty, and despair. Bumpy walks the streets like a ghost. People still greet him with respect, still call him Mr. Johnson, still ask for his help when they're in trouble. But he feels the weight of every failure, every compromise, every life lost. He thinks about Malcolm, about what he said all those years ago in Alcatraz. There's another way, a way to build power that they can't take from you. Bumpy never found that way. He built an empire on violence and vice. And now, watching it crumble, he wonders if it was worth it. It's a cool autumn evening, October 7th, 1968. Bumpy is at Wells Restaurant on 7th Avenue, a place he's been coming to for decades. He's having dinner with a few old friends, men who have known him since the beginning. They're laughing, telling old stories, reliving the glory days. For a moment, Bumpy feels young again. And then a sharp pain in his chest, like someone squeezing his heart in a vice. He grabs the table, his face going pale. Bumpy, one of his friends says, alarmed, Bumpy, you okay? He tries to speak, can't. The pain intensifies, spreads down his arm, his vision blurs. He knows what this is. He stands stumbling, trying to make it to the door, trying to get outside to breathe too. He collapses on the sidewalk. People rush over. Someone calls for an ambulance, but Bumpy knows it's too late. Lying there on the cold pavement, looking up at the Harlem sky, he thinks about his life. The violence, the power, the money, the respect. Was it enough? Was it worth it? He doesn't have an answer. And then darkness. The funeral of Ellsworth Raymond Johnson is unlike anything Harlem has seen. Thousands of people line the streets, not just gangsters and hustlers, but ordinary folks, teachers, shopkeepers, grandmothers who remember the Depression, children who only know him from stories. They come to pay their respects. Inside the church, the service is packed. Mame sits in the front row, veiled, silent. Frank Lucas is there. Nicky Barnes, old-timers who fought alongside Bumpy in the wars of the 30s and 40s. Even a few Italian mobsters paying their respects to a worthy adversary. The preacher speaks about Bumpy's life. He carefully navigates the contradiction. A man who was both criminal and protector, sinner and savior. He was not a perfect man, the preacher says, But he was our man. He stood up when others bowed down. He protected when others prayed. And he never forgot where he came from. As the casket is carried out, the crowd follows, silent, solemn. And for a moment, just a moment, Harlem stops, pauses, remembers. In the years after Bumpy's death, Harlem continues to change. Frank Lucas builds his heroin empire, becoming one of the richest gangsters in America, until he's arrested and sentenced to 70 years in prison. Nicky Barnes follows a similar path: wealth, power, betrayal, prison. The Italian mob's grip on Harlem eventually weakens as federal investigations and changing demographics shift the power dynamics. And Harlem itself, it struggles, declines, nearly dies. But it survives. In the 1980s and 90s, community activists, artists, and entrepreneurs begin to rebuild. They fight gentrification. They preserve black culture. They honor the history of the Harlem Renaissance. And they remember Bumpy Johnson, not as a saint, not as a villain, but as a complicated man who lived in complicated times. Books are written about him, movies are made, television shows bring his story to a new generation. And the people of Harlem, the ones who lived through those years, still tell stories about the man who walked among them, who protected them when no one else would, who stood up to the mob, the police, the system itself. A man who ruled Harlem not with fear alone, but with respect. Bumpy Johnson's life is a mirror held up to America itself, a country that claims to offer opportunity but builds systems designed to crush black people, a society that criminalizes survival and then wonders why people turn to crime. Bumpy didn't choose to be a gangster because he was evil. He chose it because, in Jim Crow America, it was one of the few paths to power available to a black man. He wasn't a hero, but he wasn't a monster either. He was a survivor, a strategist, a man who looked at the world as it was, not as it should be, and carved out space for himself and his people. His methods were brutal. His choices were morally compromised. His empire was built on vice. But in the end, what Bumpy Johnson really built was a legacy of resistance, of refusing to bow, of fighting back against a system designed to break him. And in Harlem, in the stories still told on street corners, in barbershops, in the memories of those who remain, that legacy lives on. Because Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster, he was Harlem's shadow king. The man who controlled New York's underworld from the darkness, who moved unseen but was felt everywhere, who built an empire that the world tried to forget but never could. Flawed, dangerous, unforgettable. And in a world that tried to erase him, he made sure they could never forget his name. The streets of Harlem still remember. They remember the numbers runners, the policy kings, the wars fought in shadows. They remember the man who walked among them with a gun in his coat and respect in his heart. They remember Bumpy Johnson, the shadow king who controlled New York's underworld. And they always will.